Freddie wrote in, hey, David, how would you increase voter turnout in the United States without making voting mandatory? I think this is an interesting one. There are countries that have very high voter turnout because voting is mandatory. My home birth country of Argentina is such an example. A big reason why I don't renew my Argentinian passport is that as an adult, from what I'm told, I would have to justify why I'm not voting when there's an election. And of course, I would say I don't live there and I'm not really following the local politics, but I would have to do that because voting is mandatory, and I don't really want to do that. So I think there's a couple different things we could do to increase voter turnout without making voting mandatory. Number one, a lot of people don't vote because elections are just not competitive in many cases. There's tons of elections that are unopposed by an incumbent in many cases, or unopposed because an incumbent is retiring and there's only one person running for it. That decreases voter turnout. That relates to the fact that we often don't have, that relates to a lot of problems, including the two-party duopoly, and that third parties would also potentially help to increase voter turnout. Voter suppression is also something that influences voting. If it were easier to vote, if you didn't have more and more restrictive voting hours and the requirement to go get supposedly free voter IDs that actually require you to have other documents that aren't free to get, right? All of the voter suppression stuff that the right has the right and Republicans have deliberately been doing to hold down the non-white and disproportionately Democratic vote, that would increase voter turnout as well. But I do think that at its core, people need to believe that their vote matters in order to get them to vote more often. And matters doesn't mean, there's two ways we can interpret my vote matters, right? There's the sort of caricature, which is most elections don't come down to one vote, so my vote doesn't matter. Now that's sort of logically fallacious, because if everybody that occurred to voted, then yes, your individual vote might not change the results, but collectively the votes of everyone who questions the value of their vote could actually change the result. So that's layer one. But I actually mean something else when I say people who feel their vote doesn't matter. There's a lot of people who are saying my vote doesn't matter because in the end, no matter who wins, nothing really is going to change. And that's, I think, a deeper issue, and it relates to third parties, and it relates to a lot of other problems with the electoral system.
The idea that elections don't come down to one vote to me always came across as a little bit arrogant, you know, to rationalize that as then I shouldn't vote, because you do live in a community, you live in a society where we're picking the leaders of all of us, right?
Oh, sort of the idea that if you're not
hinge on you.
If you're not the decider, then you don't care to vote, type of thing. Yeah, it is a little arrogant in a way.
But I mean, there are plenty of ways to increase political participation. One would be to move election days from Tuesdays to the weekends, because people got to work, right?
Yep.
And if you feel as if that your vote doesn't matter, a great way to make it matter more is to do a instant runoff system.
Instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting. I think they're the exact same thing, although maybe there's a slight difference between the two. But generally, it's the idea that you can say, really who I want to win is this candidate. If after the first round of voting is done, they are not viable, then switch my vote to this other candidate. And I think that that would also interest a lot of people, for sure. So those are a few of the things that can be done. But big picture, there's also a low level of engagement with the political system for a lot of people. A lot of people just feel like the system we have of voting is not one that ultimately makes a difference to them, to their lives. And that's something more systemic that you've got to address.
What's interesting is on the presidential level, if you have two candidates who are not interesting enough, people won't really care enough to go vote for them, right? But if they're too interesting, then there's all these controversies and scandals that go along with it, like this last round, Hillary versus Trump.
Right, people vote just because of the caricature.
And that'll negatively affect voter turnout as well.
Yes, it's bad. It's bad in either way, isn't it?